Hey, tipsters, how's it going? This is Seth and Jaron. Welcome to the RE Tipster podcast. In today's episode, Jaron and I are going to sit down to talk about a pretty interesting conversation that happened recently in the RE Tipster Facebook group. This was back in March of this year. Um, there was somebody who posted, her name was Lisa, and she gave us permission to read her post verbatim. So I'm just going to read her post. She said, I've reached a really tough spot in my business. I'm 9 to 10 months in and not profitable. I've invested a lot of time and money, over 5,000 in mailers, and to be honest, I'm very frustrated. I've been shut down and discouraged all week and want to refocus myself. I'd like to maybe hear from people who can offer insight and guidance. Honestly, I'm very hesitant to invest any more funds at this time until I become profitable. And I don't know. I don't know if that sounds anything like you, dear listener, or if you know anybody like that. I think a lot of us, if we're honest, have been there in some capacity. Maybe we've, I don't know, just had a string of bad luck, or a campaign that bombed, or trying to sell properties and nobody's biting, nothing's happening. And what are you supposed to do when you just feel stuck, especially when you're in that very, very early stage and you're just trying to prove the concept to yourself? Like you just want proof that this is worth taking the next step and spending more money on, and it still isn't working. That can be, a huge kick in the gut to just experience that immediate failure. That post from Lisa really struck a chord with a lot of people in the RE Tipster audience because it got over 100 comments. There's a lot of great advice shared on there. So I encourage you to go check it out. I'm going to link to it in the show notes for this episode at retipster.com/102, because this is episode 102. But Jared and I wanted to take some time and give our 2 cents on this subject. And the podcast just seemed like a natural place for us to do that. So, Jared, maybe we start with you. What are your initial thoughts when you saw that post from Lisa?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of them. Actually, in preparation of this show, Seth, I included a bunch of bullet points for us to go through on a number of just general principles and ideas to help people who feel stuck in their land business. And by the way, guys, this is applicable whether it's a land business or any kind of startup business. It can get pretty tough, and I think my initial reaction to answer your question is I think ultimately, based on what Lisa was sharing, it's really important to have the right perspective when you start a new business venture. Like I tell all of the coaching clients that go through our land coaching program, I teach them something that I've dubbed the 24-month rule. And it's not necessarily 24 months. It might be a year, it might be a year and a half, it might be 2.5 months. But in just a general, time frame, I think it's much more common for successful people to have worked on their on their business as a side hustle for at least a year to 2 years before it became anything of significance that even gave them the idea or possibility of quitting their day job to do full time. And that's not sexy. That doesn't sell from a rah motivational stage like the overnight success stories do. But those overnight success stories are outliers and they're inspirational, but it's not very practical to build your life around an outlier because it's a fluke. It's not consistent. It's not logical. It's not a repeatable process. Something that is repeatable though is if you go into this land business for for 2 years and you say, I'm going to commit to this thing for 2 years and come hell or high water, I'm going to do it faithfully and then see where you're at. I do think on the other side, there are certain things that people are just not called to do. Like if I was a contractor, I mean, I promise you, I am not wired mechanically to like assemble, desks or, uh, do framing work or that kind of stuff. I am super slow, super just not good at it. I'm just very, I'm very incompetent for lack of a better word. But, but if I had, let's say I had the dream of becoming a contractor and I gave it 2 years and it didn't go anywhere, I wasn't able to get deals or get clients or, make success, then I think at that point there is a point where you just throw in the towel. I think that that's a healthy thing. But I would give it 2 years. Because most people, a lot of even people in the comment thread on Lisa's post, there was one guy in particular. I think we actually mentioned him specifically somewhere.
The
Do you
Joe?
remember his name? Yeah, Joe. He had a really interesting thing to say. He said, Lisa, I wasn't profitable for the first year of my land business, but in my second year, I've made more money than like I ever have before, or he's been ultra successful. And he's doing it full time and he's loving life and it's been awesome. Imagine if he stopped his business in the first year. What he has now, what the land business has become with him or has become for him in the second year is life changing. It's like amazing. It's his like dreams are coming true, but it took 2 years, not one, you know? So imagine he would miss out on all of the benefits that and all the fruit of his labor if he would have just thrown in the towel too prematurely.
More on Joe's little comment there. The thing that stuck out to me, he made a really good point, is name me a business that was profitable in its first year. Like it's actually not normal for any company out there to be, profitable from day one. Sometimes it can happen, and in the land business, it certainly can if you do everything right. But like even if it doesn't, that doesn't mean you're a failure. It doesn't mean that like you really dropped the ball, you're doing everything wrong. It's actually, I mean, it's almost like an unfair expectation just from a general business standpoint.
Yeah, and to kind of play a little bit of devil's advocate, because if anybody knows me around the RE Tipster community, they know I'm a pretty strong proponent for the profit first financial management system for entrepreneurs. I do think that you can be profitable from day one if you structure it properly, but most people don't approach business that way. The big problem that you face within your first phase of growing a business is how do I grow, because you got to do a certain amount of volume to make a certain amount of money that you can actually like take a salary and still have enough money not only to take a salary but also have money to go back to operating expenses and marketing costs and all of these things. So there's a balancing act and kind of an art and a science to this thing where you kind of have to. I always tell people in our second session in coaching, at the very end, I bring up profit first and I say, success is a two-sided coin. On one side, it's the activity that you know how to do that actually generates revenue. So in our case, it's buying and selling land. You know how to send mail, you know how to do due diligence and underwrite properties and so on and so forth, and you know how to get things sold. The second side of that coin of success, though, is managing that revenue. Because how I used to operate my business when I first got started was money was in the account. I got all excited. I was like, it's time to do more mail. So there were months where I've had tens of thousands of dollars hit my account and then right immediately just go right back out. And there's things like taxes that you have to save for, paying. There's, paying yourself not only a salary, but also like owner's compensation is another big piece to doing things the correct way. And there's a lot that can go into it. So again, most people starting off, they have a lot to figure out and they're bound to make a bunch of mistakes because they've never done it before. And to go into this thing thinking, oh, I'm gonna, send $5,000 worth of mailers and get a bunch of return, like I think that's an unrealistic expectation, you know?
Yeah, and I think sort of the nature of what we wanted to do in this conversation is cover a lot of the possibilities or the potential things that might be going wrong, because it's really important to point out there's a lot of things that can go wrong in real estate investing. Sometimes it's just one little thing that's off and that kind of compromises the whole operation. Sometimes there's a bunch of things that need to be tuned up. And, for example, like you could be just a master at direct mail and just nail everything and do it all right. But if you don't know how to structure offer prices, it all falls apart, or if you can't get the things sold, or if you're just too lazy to get them sold or whatever. I mean, so we wanted to go through a lot of the most common things that we've both encountered from other land investors. These things that get posted in the forum all the time, retipster.com/forum, our Facebook group, different coaching calls and our monthly office hours. I mean, it seems like a lot of the same stuff that comes up again and again. So we just wanted to go through the list and point out some things to think about in case it hasn't already occurred to you. Uh, if you happen to be struggling in some aspect here.
Guys, the point of this episode is to really help people get unstuck because the land business is pretty unreal. Like not in a rah guru kind of way, but in just being honest, both me and Seth have kind of been around the block a little bit with real estate stuff. I just happens to be the career that I started when I was in my early 20s. And, I've just been around and I've seen a lot of what's out there. And one of the things me and Seth constantly come back to when we look at other strategies is like, man, the land business has ruined me to any other type of real estate investing or investing in general because it's not uncommon to make 100% ROI on any given deal. Like it's just unreal. Like I'm dealing with a deal right now that I'm buying for 15,500 and we're listing it for 62,000. I don't know if we're going to sell it for that, but that's amazing. That's like that stuff doesn't exist. Even if I sold it for 50 grand or 45 grand, that would be amazing. So that's I do want to just really encourage you guys. This is really if you've started your land business, maybe you learned from, you got education that really didn't fill in all the gaps for you, or you're struggling to kind of put all the pieces together. We're hoping that this episode can be a huge dose of encouragement and affirmation, like, yes, this business is the real thing and you're going to be successful in it if you stick to the process. And then here are some a handful of practical things that you can adjust or tweak or adjust your mindset on in order to be successful.
Just kicking this off, the first thing we'll talk about is, and I think this was Lisa's example here, and this is really where everybody starts, is just getting a deal. Just finding a property where it's a good deal, you can sell it at a good price, you can make the offer, the person's going to say yes. A lot of people can't get to this first stage. And, there's a lot of things that could possibly be going wrong here. A lot of this depends on, really carefully looking at what have I done so far that has led me to this point where I do not have results, because something there is broken. And it's not always obvious, doesn't always jump out to you, but sometimes it's just a matter of like really breaking it down to each individual step that you've taken and start picking it apart. And when you go and do your second try, obviously you should probably change something because it didn't work the first time, but keep track of that. What did you change? If it did start working, why do you think that might be? It just, I know one of the common things, there's, I don't know if it's a debate or whatnot, just a difference of thought in terms of how to handle direct mail. But one approach is to use postcards or neutral letters, where you're basically just sending out a message saying, "Hey, I see you own land and I'm trying to buy land. Give me a call." And then you talk about it, you learn about the property, you make an offer, that kind of thing. And another route is to use blind offers, where you don't really invite them to call you. You just send them an offer. And they can call you, they can respond, but the idea is not to have a big conversation about it. The idea is to just get the number in front of them and see if the answer is yes or no or maybe. And both both paths have pros and cons. It's not like one of them is the perfect solution for every market, every investor, every situation. So you kind of have to understand, what each one has to offer. And kind of along with that, um, in terms of where to get the list of people to send the mail to, one option is to use a data service like DataTree, which is pretty convenient. Gives you a lot of different ways to filter the list down. And when you get the list, it's pretty easy to sort through. So you don't have to spend a whole lot of time or frustration dealing with it. Another option is to get what's known as a delinquent tax list. And I've got a huge tutorial on this. The delinquent tax list is notoriously difficult to get. And when you get it, it's usually a mess to work through. However, there is a built in source of motivation in this list because everybody has delinquent taxes. And there's different camps out there who swear by one or the other, and they say that the other camp is just stupid. I'm not going to say that about anybody because I've tried both. And I know they can both work. But the point is, if you've gone down one of those tracks, say you're doing postcards to a delinquent tax list, if that's not working for you, consider trying the other one. Consider trying the blind offers to a DataTree list or some other combination.
Seth, I gotta just say, switching from postcards to and neutral letters to blind offers was a big pivot and a big turning point in my land business. When I first got started, I was doing just what you said. I was doing neutral letters to the delinquent tax list, and it was hit or miss because getting a really solid list from a particular county was a huge endeavor and was really a 50-50 chances whether or not I was going to get the list, if the county was going to work with me. It was just a big bottleneck. And I definitely worked. I got good deals from it, but I really started seeing consistent deal flow when I was doing blind offers in Florida. And there's a lot of variables that can go into your responses for direct mail. But I started seeing consistent deals, and I was able to actually figure out what my deal rate was, or like, the amount of deals that I'll get per, certain amount of direct mail on average. When I started doing blind offers. So and again, there are markets where blind offers aren't probably the best way to go. I would actually say that if you don't have a lot of comps available, or there's a lot of diversity in the typography of properties for a particular market, like 10 acres on the side of a mountain is very different than 10 acres of rolling hills, right? Like there, and that has like hookups, like utility hookups and stuff to it, right? So if it's hard to narrow down kind of a blind offer approach because properties are so diverse, I definitely think doing postcards or neutral letters can be better under certain circumstances. But by and large, for me in Florida, switching to blind offers was a big pivot and big turning point in the success of my land business. So if you're doing one over the other, I think it's really good to try out something else if it's not working for you.
Even when we say blind offers, I mean, that just those two words, there's a whole world you can get lost in blind offers. I mean, to like price out properties and figure out what makes sense. Again, like whether it's even going to work well in a certain market or not. I can totally tell you, I've had certain markets where I don't know what the deal is. I don't know why, but the blind offers have just done horrible there. And in the same market, the neutral postcard with a delinquent tax list for some reason does better. I don't know. I don't get it. Is there something I was doing wrong? Probably, but like it's a big journey to figure out what that is. And sometimes the best way to do it, or just an easier way to handle that, is to just try different things. Along these lines of direct mail, I know a really common thing I'll see in different forums and Facebook groups is, if somebody says, I'm not getting deals or something's going wrong, somebody will inevitably jump in and just say, send more mail. Like, just, there you go. I just solved your problems, as if that's the answer to everything. And I get where they're coming from, because in a very real way, like that is how you're going to get anything happening, is sending more mail. But like, there's so much more to it than that. You don't want to just start spending thousands of dollars on direct mail if you don't really have a clear direction and goal, and you're really being educated about it. I know every time that I've messed something up in my land business, it always has come down to me shooting from the hip, like, skimping on due diligence, or just not thinking through my list that carefully, or not thinking through my offers, like just going, and just doing something. Like that's when things start to go sideways. So like, be careful. And that was one of the things I had going for me when I was getting started, was I had very little money and I could not afford to make mistakes. And I was keenly aware of that. And I did have time, and I was incredibly meticulous about being a perfectionist with everything I did. And because of that, like the results came pretty quickly. And some people just won't do that. And I don't know if it's like just the way their brain works or what, but it's important to understand that like when a person does get results, they were probably paying really close attention to a lot of things and being very intentional. They weren't just shooting from the hip. Sometimes you can get lucky, but I think that's more the exception than the rule.
Yeah. Honestly, failure is really just feedback. Like if you remove the emotion from failure, really what you're doing with direct mail or any kind of endeavor is you're testing a hypothesis, and if your experiment doesn't work or your hypothesis doesn't work, then failing or making a mistake or not having a favorable outcome is just feedback that, hey, you need a different hypothesis. And if you approach what you're doing that way, instead of just getting frustrated and getting emotional about it, if you just remove the emotion and say, okay, my even though it seems like this works for some people, for me it's clearly not working, so I'm gonna go back to the drawing board again and again and again until you fine tune the things that are known to work generally in the industry. You tailor that to your business specifically. Another thing too that I hear quite often, a lot of people will hear you can buy land property for 10 cents on the dollar or 20 cents on the dollar. And I think in some markets still today, like if you're in an area that's very rural or doesn't have a lot of demand or a lot of growth metrics and stuff, you definitely can find really cheap property out there. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say you'll never be able to buy a property for 10 cents on the dollar in land, but I think
Just
that's
for the
Mhm.
record, I've had accepted offers in that range this year. So
Yeah, so
just so you know, it's not a farce, but I think I see where you're going with this. That's it's hard to just apply that widely to every market and assume that's always what's going to work.
and I think in really competitive markets too, like the bedrocks of the land business, Florida, Texas, Colorado, Arizona, Southern California. I mean, again, I think if you start getting into Arizona, New Mexico, Southern California, that's where you can start finding some really good deals still. But even with that, like if you're in the counties that every other land investor is hitting, in Florida, I go really aggressive with my offers, probably more aggressive than most people would be comfortable with. And I don't actually encourage like anybody to go as aggressive as I do, like in our coaching program or anything, because I have established relationships with land specialized agents that I have proof of concept with and have history with, and I know that I can trust their valuation. Like I can almost trust it with my life. So because I've had them with sell property within $2,000 of the list price over the last year and a half, 2 years of my life, right? So when you have that kind of track record with somebody, you can be a little bit more risky, right? So I'll come up pretty hard. And we just ended up closing on a property last week where the guy got back to me and said, hey, your property, your offer is the best offer that I've ever gotten. Why are you offering so much? And the reason why I got the deal from somebody else is because I really, I had a localized agent that went by the property and it backed up to water, and I looked into it, and we can sell it for a lot higher than other properties in the area because it backs up to water and so on and so forth. So he was getting offers around the $5,000 to $10,000 range. I offered 15, and we ended up buying it for 20. But I'm listing it for 39.9. So it's not a like super home run deal. Like but the numbers still make sense and make it worth it. So I'm moving forward on that deal. And the only reason why I got a call back was because my offer was higher. So I do think that sometimes, with offers being too low, I want to say this very carefully because I don't want everybody going off and sending off like 80 cents on the dollar offers, because you're not going to make any money that way. And like Seth said, there are deals that come in where you can, buy super cheap. 10 cents on the dollar deals do exist out there, but I don't think you can base your business, like create a systematic business around 10 cents on the dollar. So just take
Well,
that with
I
a
think
grain of salt.
you just gotta consider what market you're in. I mean,
Yeah,
I
that's
think
true.
generally that's true. I mean, I would give yourself more wiggle room. Don't be so militant about that low. I mean, that's really low, and it can happen. But I think, to your point, you have to be able to look at each deal individually and be willing to go higher if you need to. I think that's one of the advantages of that neutral letter approach is that it takes way more time. It's way more tedious, but you actually have the benefit of looking at every single individual property before they get your offer. So like you can make a higher offer. Or, if you get a agent involved, I mean, that's a huge advantage that most people are not taking advantage of. Um, so yeah, it's when you sort of try to follow this formulaic thing, which can work, but like you just have to realize like some rules are made to be broken, and there are times when you can wiggle outside of that established norm when it makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that shooting for like 80% with blind offers instead of 100% perfect is a pretty good principle to go by, because um, the fact that you're going to be off on some of the offers is going to be inevitable. Like I
Just to clarify, when you say 80%, you're not talking about the market value. You're talking
No,
about
no, no.
just
I'm talking about, yeah, like if you are shooting for good enough versus like
gotcha.
perfect, that's really what I'm saying. Um I think that that's the approach. You got to understand that that's just reality. I have a full-time VA who literally goes property by property and takes an entire month to prepare my list, which is painstaking and really detailed. And I'm glad he's doing it and not me. But even with that degree of scrutiny and due diligence, I'm removing anything that I wouldn't be able to sell. So anything that's landlocked or in wetlands, or I do all of that due diligence on the front end. So when I send out, like, my list is really prime and really good property. Um, and even with that degree of scrutiny, I still mess up where I should have, I offered 5 grand and I should have offered, 15, or people, yell at me and get angry at me because my offer is like way the heck off. So I actually put on my direct mail piece, my letter in the mail. I generated this offer with limited resources that I could find online. I'm willing to pay you more if it makes sense. So if you're, have a property that you're willing to make a deal on, I can't pay full market value for any property that I buy. But if you're tired of paying property taxes on a property you're not using, et cetera, give me a call and I'll see if I can come up on the offer that I gave you. And putting that in has really helped because that gives me some wiggle room and some negotiation room. But all that being said, one of the benefits to blind offers is actually that discrepancy of you're not going to get it perfect, because there have been times I offered $2,000 on a property I would have offered six, and they accepted 2,000, and it was awesome. And so that does happen too. But you're not going to be able to get to perfection with your blind offers. You got to just shoot for good enough.
Yeah, and other like nuances. So, we're talking about like these established norms of like offer amounts or response rates and that kind of thing. Like, it's important to acknowledge that every county is different. Like, there are some counties that may not have enough motivated sellers. Like, people just aren't motivated to sell there, or other counties where there's a lot more competition from other land flippers than others. I mean, still generally low competition, but still, like, I guarantee you, there are some counties in northern Michigan where probably nobody has ever set foot, and other counties where like lots of people are there on a pretty regular basis. So you just have to understand, like, it's not an apples to apples comparison when you take one county to another, or even one state to another.
100%.
And sometimes adjustments have to be made for that, kind of like what we've been talking about.
I just wanted to mention one little story related to this whole kind of, it's a little bit different. It's not necessarily about making your offers too low or too high. It's a kind of a kissing cousin to it. I had somebody who reached out to me a while back about possibly being a coaching client. They decided to just move forward with the RE Tipster Masterclass and not pursue coaching. But they ended up coming back to me about, I would say, 3 to 6 months later and jumping on another call because they were frustrated. They had been going through the course and they did everything right. They did direct mail, everything was right, and they were getting deals, but they weren't making enough revenue per deal, like gross revenue, to actually be profitable. And through the conversation, what we discovered was they were going after property that was just too cheap. So like if you're buying property for $500 and you're selling it for $2,000, but you're spending, $1,000 in direct mail, the numbers may not work out with your operating cost. Because a lot of people will pay for a website, they'll pay for a CRM system to manage their leads. Normally they'll use something like Traveling Mailbox, et cetera, et cetera. I've actually broke down the numbers in for our coaching students where it's kind of brass tacks outside of direct mail costs. You're looking at about $500 to $700 with like CRMs and stuff like that in terms of overhead. And then in addition to that, if you're consistently sending out mail, you might be sending out, like I'm sending out in a couple of test states right now, 2,000 units of mail per month, and that's about $1,600. So, that's if I'm only going to be making $1,000 spread or a $500 spread per property, even if I have a great, response rate, those numbers aren't going to work out. So you might need to, unless you're doing terms, like I think those cheaper properties are great for terms because in the long run, you can make a way bigger spread. But if you're trying to do cash deals, you might need to go a little bit higher in terms of value. And I know that brings some issues related to like generating or getting enough like working capital, and we can dive into some strategy and some tips there. But I do think that one possible issue is if you're not profitable and you're doing everything right, you might be running into not having enough gross revenue per deal or gross profit per deal in order to sustain your business.
Just hit on a few other common things under this whole getting deals umbrella. So I know another thing that some people fall into, I've even done this from time to time when I've gotten super busy, is just failing to follow up on every lead or getting back to people fast enough, uh, which is, in a way, it's kind of like a no duh. Like, why would you not follow up with people that you've spent money to have them reach out to you? Like, why wouldn't you close the loop? But there can be all kinds of reasons why people just drop the ball on that. And if you're going to drop the ball on that, then just plan to lose opportunities, because that's what that means. A lot of times a person may be calling about one thing and there's actually a different property they didn't even mention that they have, or maybe they know somebody. There's all kinds of things that can come out of just simply getting back with people. And another thing that's surprisingly common is, when you send mail to somebody and you're telling them to call you or visit your website or, you know, fill out the offer and send it back, there's a lot of times when certain parts of this communication cycle can be broken. Like, for example, I know I'll never forget this lady. She said, nobody's ever come to my website or submitting anything. So I went to her website and I tried to submit it, and the thing was broken. The form didn't even work. So, like, pretend that you're your own customer and go through this stuff and test it. Make sure it actually works. And maybe, pay attention to what you're saying as well. There could be something you're saying that's turning people off. Like, really look at it through the eyes of your customer. Even if, like, maybe your form is asking too many questions, or maybe it's redundant, or maybe it's not asking enough. Like, just really scrutinize that. And no, you might be surprised at little mistakes or mishaps that you're finding in that process.
Yeah, I think that's pure gold, man. That's really good.
Yeah. So moving on here. So I know another common issue or problem that people run into. Maybe they're having no problem finding the deals, but they're not able to get them sold or sold fast enough. And again, there can be all kinds of different reasons for this. Uh, I know actually, like, just the market that you're in can have a big impact on this. I know, like, it was a pretty regular thing when I was in Michigan doing a lot of deals there. The properties would just like hang out forever. Like it, and when I say forever, I mean like 6 to 9 months before they would sell. Like, it was not selling the next day or the next week on the regular. And in other markets, they do sell that quick. And it also has a lot to do with the pricing and what you're saying in your listing and where you're advertising it and all this stuff. But just first of all, just acknowledging where you're at does have an influence on that. And that's part of why we talk so much about, before you do anything, pick a good market first. Pick a market where people actually want to buy land, so that, the hardest part of this, getting the stuff sold, isn't so hard. It just kind of happens naturally. Um, but Jared, when you think about this, like, what are some common issues that you see people having, or problems or mistakes in terms of getting their properties sold quickly?
Yeah, I mean, I would reiterate what you said is probably the number one issue is being in a market where there's a lot of demand, and it's kind of hard to quantify that. We have a blog post about market research and using a website called bestplaces.net to find growth metrics and population metrics, but I don't even think that fully tells the entire story, because you have to couple that with market activity, and it's hard to really know uh, where to find a true representation of market activity, because you could go to Zillow, and I think that's probably your best bet. But there's a lot of properties that get bought and sold that never touch Zillow. So it's hard to really know, when you're just getting started, exactly where, good markets are. But I think a safe bet is to not deal with things you can't get answers to, and just deal with data driven decisions. And so, kind of my general practice right now, I've actually been branching out into a couple other states beyond Florida, just kind of testing out the markets and stuff. And what I've done is I've looked at growth metrics on a county level, and then I went over to Zillow between 1 and 10 acres and looked to see how many properties were currently listed and how many properties were sold within the last 12 months. And this is shooting from the hip. There's literally no rhyme or reason. This is just kind of at a gut level. So I'm sorry I don't have more quantified data to back up why I use this metric, but I still end up using it. To me, if I see over 100 active listings, and I see over 100 sold listings within the last 12 months, to me, that's a strong enough indicator of decent market activity. And so if all the growth data looks good, that's kind of the thing that I use. But again, like, if you had 87 instead of 100, you probably would be okay, or there's no real rhyme or reason why I'm using that rule of thumb. I just figure in my head, like, okay, 100 seems to be a pretty good ballpark. But I'm sure that if you were to take that at face value and only target markets that had that, you'd be missing opportunity in markets that had 50, sold price or listed prices. And I think sold prices is more important than active, because you might be in a situation like the current market that we're in. There's not a lot of inventory because it's a buying frenzy. And so you might go to a great market that doesn't have a lot of listed properties right now, this very second, but over the last 12 months, they've sold like 1,000 properties between 1 and 10 acres, and that would be a great market. So take it with a major grain of salt, please. But I do think at least coupling market activity with good growth data, or at least positive growth data. It doesn't even have to be like the top 10% of market growth for the state, but even if it's just a not negative, or above, 5% or something like that, I think that you can find really good deals in a lot of those markets, as long as there's a lot of market activity. The reason why you want market activity is because you want to know that when you buy this property, people are going to buy it. And I do think that, just to wrap this up, another huge misconception is people think that land is like wholesaling houses or other types of real estate. If you're doing cash, I've found that it has a longer sales cycle. So I have sold property within a week of listing it. That does happen, but I base my business assuming that I'm going to have a 3 to 6 month turnaround time per property, because that's what's more normal.
There's also a lot of stuff in the selling process that, in my mind, it seems rather elementary, like just common sense stuff. But at the same time, I realize there's a lot of people out there who have never done this. Maybe they're new to the business and it's not common sense. Like, they just don't know this stuff. And we totally talk about all this in the Land Investing Masterclass. I mean, it's all included in there, but it's just important to reiterate, when you're, putting together a property listing, like, pictures are important. Like, they matter a lot. Like parcel maps, like on-site pictures, drone pictures if you can get them. I don't think those are must, but like, put together a really, really good visual portrayal of the property. I mean, this is really what does the selling in a lot of cases. So, I mean, don't don't skip that. Like, don't just grab some screenshot from Google Earth and call it good. Like, really do a good job of helping people understand what they're going to get. And when it comes to like a description and just basic details so people understand what they're looking at, like write a good description that paints the picture of what they can expect to get. That helps people like dream a little bit. I mean, that's really why a lot of people buy land is because of the dream. So, play into that and give them something to dream about. One pretty solid, just boilerplate example to work from. If you go to REI Conversion or their REI land list theme and just check out their demo, I mean, the listings don't have like a huge description or anything, but it shows you like, oh yeah, this is what I'm supposed to talk about. This, like the size, the county, the road access, the utilities, the elevation, the zoning, the coordinates, all this stuff. Just check those boxes. Make sure you're talking about it so people can see it. We've also got several different blog posts. I'm going to link to a couple of them in the show notes. Again, retipster.com/102, where we've just gone into a lot of detail on how to write a killer property listing. So be sure to check that out too. But just make sure that like the information you're putting out there is really a good, well put together package so somebody can see it and know exactly what they're looking at. And if they do have questions, it's not because you didn't put it on there. It's because they just didn't read it. So just make sure they have the information that they need.
Seth, to what you just said there, I want everybody to kind of have the mindset when you're approaching your land listings that there's a buyer for every property. I know that there are a handful of properties that are harder to sell than others. Like, I don't mail to wetlands. If it's on the wetlands mapper, I take it off. And even if it's not on the wetlands mapper, if it's in northeastern Florida, if there's cypress trees on the property, I don't buy it because it's harder to sell. But nobody really wants wetlands unless they're a duck hunter. I had a property in southern Indiana that it was a really large property, or at least larger for what I normally buy. I think it was like 38 acres, and a good 5 to 8 acres was pure wetlands. And I remember I had a buyer. This was the time when I would actually like go meet with buyers, which is potential buyers, which is not recommended. But I was showing him the property, and the only reason he was looking at my property was because there was 5 to 8 acres of wetlands, and he was a duck hunter, and he wanted wetland property specifically because like apparently it's great for duck hunting. So if your description is not speaking to the right audience, that could be a major problem. That could be the thing that's hindering you from selling the property. If you really understand the selling points of your property, then you can speak to the right audience and get in front of them and highlight why your property meets their needs perfectly. You just got to really dig deep to know the selling points of your property. One of the reasons why I kind of go for low hanging fruit though, and like why I scrub so hard on the front end, is because I don't have the time, frankly, because I work very full time at RA Tipster to really dig deep and fully understand each one of the pros and cons of each one of my properties. But if I was full time in my land business, and I was, putting out listings, I also use land specialized real estate agents who do a lot of the heavy lifting for me. But if I was doing this traditionally, where I was, posting my properties out there, I would spend a lot of time researching my properties and really understanding why would somebody want to buy this. And, even if it's a property that you yourself wouldn't necessarily buy, somebody out there will want to buy your property, whether it's to legally park their camper or just to, check the box that I'm a land investor, I'm a landowner. Like there's a number of different reasons, but you got to highlight that. There was a post.
Actually, just to jump in there. So
Mhm.
like, I would totally agree. Like there's a buyer for everything, but that buyer may not be willing to pay top dollar for that. So like if
Good
there are
point.
wetlands, if there is landlocked, if there is an issue, like
Get it super
know
cheap. Yeah.
that before you buy it so you can account
Hmm.
for that. It kind of goes back to the, whenever people get hurt, or a very common scenario when a person, doesn't make a lot of money on a land deal, it's because they skip the due diligence or they just don't really look that hard. They shoot from the hip. So and again,
No,
just Jared's
I'm
totally
really
right.
glad
Just
you
make
brought.
sure you're actually paying an appropriate price if it's got an issue.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up because um, I don't want to paint the picture that you should not do proper due diligence. If you are stuck with a bad property, like, think mistakes do happen. If you market it, correctly, and you get in front of the right eyeballs, you should be okay to sell it at some point. It might take 2 years, or you should at least be able to get what you bought it for, if you're buying right. But the only time I've ever lost money in the land business is what Seth is saying, where there was a particular property in Florida where it had a road right next to the property on the parcel map. And I had an agent go and scope it out, and the road was accessible and everything, but technically it was a private road. And so technically the property was landlocked. And I bought it for 10,000. We sold it for 8,500 just to get rid of it. I wish I knew kind of what I know now about landlocked properties. There are ways where you can get easement access, but at the time I was just like, all right, I just got to move on. And I lost money because I didn't call the county and do what I needed to do to make sure that it actually had road access. So it is super important. If there is an issue and you still want to buy the property, like Seth said, get it for dirt cheap so that you can't help but win.
Another thing, it's I don't know if this is like a massive reason why a deal won't happen, but it can get in the way is when people can't find your property. And this is something that is not a huge issue when you're dealing with houses because there's just a simple address you can type in and you can get there. But with land, a lot of times there is no address. And surveys are expensive, especially on the super cheap properties. And if you just want to use the GIS parcel maps, it can be kind of a challenge unless you make it really easy and help a person understand, okay, now I'm on the property. Like, I know I'm here, that kind of thing. And really just being prepared for that obstacle, like having the tools accessible, have the exact GPS coordinates, have the parcel maps all printed out, not printed out, but saved that you can easily send to them. Use apps like Landglide or the Hunt Stand app or the MapRight app. And I think one of the drawbacks of those is that, most of those require a subscription, but they do have like a free 7-day trial. So it can be useful for that. Even if you skip the whole app thing, I know sometimes that's just getting more complicated than some people are comfortable with. Maybe somebody doesn't want to sign up for a trial or something. But like, if you just go nuts, getting like plenty of parcel maps from different angles, get the address of the house next door. I mean, so they can get there and then understand where the property is in relation to that. I mean, there's things you can do, but like it requires that you try. Like, understand that this is an obstacle and it's going to need a little bit of work so that you can make it easier for them. I think just if the effort is there, instead of just here's the parcel number, go find it. Like nobody's going to be able to do that unless they're a land investor. So, um, just, uh, just understand that. And, don't let that be something that gets in the way of getting a property sold.
Yeah, and kind of going into our next point that we have about overturning your nose, I actually have a story that's kind of a good segue. So one of the, it's kind of related to people not being able to find my property or visit my property. So I had one of the first properties I bought in Florida. It's really unfortunate because it has a road that will get you there, but the road itself is a dirt road with a bunch of holes in it, and it's some of the holes are like super huge, so you can't really get a car past them. And so I was always wondering why, whenever I would send people to those properties or to this property, why they would just ghost me after that. And so I finally found out by having an agent go by that it wasn't the property itself that had an access issue. It was the road going to the property that you had to deal with. And so when you have a situation like that where it's just like a weird outlier thing that's hindering people from being interested in buying your property or even being able to see it, something that's really powerful is knowing how to overcome the negatives of your property. If you have a difficult property to sell and you constantly are having people go visit it and check it out, but then they're not buying, just ask them like, why aren't you interested in this property? I'm not putting pressure on you at all. I'm just wanting to know what the problem is with the property. And enough of those conversations, you're going to find some themes, and you got to just be creative and think through, okay, if this property has a big portion of wetlands, or if this property, is hard to get to, or has a bunch of trees on it, or, needs to be cleared, or whatever the issue is, Um, there was a listing that I shared in the RE Tipster Facebook group, probably a couple of months back now, that I think was the best listing I've ever seen in my life. It was written by an agent that had a really dumpy house that like was really terrible, and the way she described the property was like it has a open concept dot dot dot. If you mean open meaning there's no window, so like there's lots of light or whatever, like she turned all of the negatives about the property into an investment opportunity that made you want to buy the property just because it was so much fun. Like her listing was that good. And I don't know if we're going to be able to hit that, especially if we don't have experience in copywriting. I would encourage you guys, by the way, if you do a lot of land listings, to take some copywriting courses, like marketing courses on how to write good ad copy, because that is a huge superpower in learning how to speak the right language to the right audience. So if you can get in front of them, having your listing speak to the right audience based on your pros and your cons of your property is a huge win. But all that being said, bringing the point home, if you can clearly identify what is negative about your property and then overcome it by, sometimes, as crazy as it sounds, I've actually seen some YouTube videos that talk about different psychology and the way people respond to communication. And sometimes people don't even really need a good answer. They just need a reason in order to like check off a negative in their head. So, you might just tell them, hey, like, sorry, I'm late. Traffic was crazy, but they don't press you to really know if traffic was crazy. Like, really, how bad was it? They just, needed to have a reason why you were late. Whereas if you come and you don't give them a reason, then they're upset because there wasn't a reason for it. So sometimes we're wired weird that way.
I heard somebody say, "Sorry, I was late. The Suez Canal was blocked."
Yeah, exactly. So I think if you have, even if it's not necessarily like a super solid good reason, if you have just any reason for a negative to be there and for a negative not to be a big deal, that's going to really help you.
Another sort of elementary thing, but again, like this takes work and sometimes money, depending on how you decide to go with it. Is just getting your property listed on all the websites that it should be listed on. Obviously the big three free ones, and sometimes even a paid website might make sense as well, depending on the property and the market. Just realizing like if you don't put this information out where people are looking for it, you're going to be severely limited in your ability to reach the people who are actually going to buy this thing. So if you have a buyer's list, utilize that as well. But just it's really easy to like put a lot of your effort into one thing. But if you're not closing the loop, like if you don't, you can have the best property listing, the best photos, the coolest drone video ever made. But if you're not getting it in front of people who actually are interested in that, it's all for nothing. So don't forget about that part too.
Yeah, 100%, man.
And also, there's these other little creative alternative strategies like sending out neighbor letters. I mean, that's kind of like a knee jerk first reaction that I have almost on every single property because that could be a super easy sale. The idea of offering seller financing, for some people it makes sense with their goals, for some people it doesn't. But if you're open to that, then obviously do it because that's going to, if anything, make that thing sell faster. Um, you know, if you want to get land agents involved, I mean, that can be a huge, huge advantage.
Let me
Um,
um let me jump in there, Seth, on neighbor letters. Something too I want to just say about neighbor letters. Um, when you are dealing with motivated sellers on the buying side, using letters as a form of communication or as a form of follow up can also be really helpful that not a lot of people think of. Like when you're communicating with motivated sellers, not all of them, but by and large, a lot of them are kind of more flaky people for whatever reason, and a lot of buyers are flaky too. But um, a lot of the times I found like certain people that I've dealt with might live off grid, or like I literally just last week I had two leads that were approaching on closing, and they weren't communicating with the title company. And so I started freaking out a little bit, like, hey, what's happening here? And so I skip traced their phone number and their email. And, it's a 50-50 chance whether those emails and phone numbers work from like a skip tracing software. But I blasted all the communications that I could. And then I also sent out an overnight letter to both of these two individuals. And within over the weekend, they got back to the title company because they got one of them because they got the letter. The other one, I just kept calling, and it turns out that she went out of town and her house, I guess, runs on a generator, and she doesn't, like, her phone was disconnected when she wasn't there. So I thought, like, her phone, I don't know what happened. She fell off the face of the planet, and then her phone was just going beep, 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 and wasn't working anymore. So neighbor letters, and following up with letters can be a really powerful thing if you're not able to get a hold of sellers. You just got to kind of put the hustle on, guys. Like, be aggressive. It's okay.
Yeah, and that's actually, it reminds me of, back in my old day job, what I did was closed commercial real estate loans all day. I mean, that was my function. And um a lot of what that job consisted of was just reminding people, like, just, hey, remember that thing I told you to do? Do it. You haven't done it yet. Here's what you still have to do. Do this, Like, it wasn't hard. It was just, people are busy. People get distracted. There's all kinds of other priorities and things that some people just don't even understand. They're confused. So just really treating people almost like you're dealing with a child sometimes. And just, yeah, like you said, Jaron, like, get the hustle on, like, pick up the phone, call them, text them, email them, like, keep the ball rolling. Because a lot of times, like, there's really no reason it shouldn't be moving. It's just that people are forgetting stuff. So, speaking of picking up the phone, a lot of times builders and developers and farmers and that kind of thing can be another huge source of buyers, especially right now when people are actually building things like crazy. This was not always the case. 10 years ago, this was not that effective of a strategy, at least in the markets I was working. But now it is pretty much everywhere because, there's a housing shortage, affordable housing crisis. Like, people want land. So call builders. They can be a great source of buyers.
Yeah, farmers too. I mean, there was a property, one of my first properties in Indiana. I sat on 10 acres of farmland for way too long, and I was getting pressure from my private money investor to get the thing sold. So I called up local farms, and there happened to be a farm. I think if it wasn't connected to it, it was like a big farm company that had a bunch of acreage in that county, and they ended up buying it like right away. And they just didn't know about it, and I sent it to them, and it was a good price, so they bought it right away. So getting that hustle on is a really big piece of this working. I would say, though, as an alternative, like, if you're, like me, I don't have the time these days to be, selling property is the biggest bottleneck in the land business. The majority of what you're going to be spending your time doing is following up with buyer leads, doing your buyer email blast each week or every other day, or however you structure it, getting things, listed everywhere, writing descriptions, getting pictures, studying your property so you know how to sell it. All that stuff is like what you spend the bulk of your time doing. What I did in my business, though, because I love working at RE Tipster, and this is like a dream opportunity for me. I outsourced, all thanks to my wife. She was the one, give credit to her, credit's due. She was the one that figured this out. But there's a big difference between an agent that just buys and sells houses and one that specializes in land. And we actually have a blog article that we'll put in the show notes, that shows you systematically how to find a land specialized real estate agent. But if I work exclusively with agents, but there's pros and cons to that. The pros are, I have somebody to help me on the due diligence side, somebody to help me on the comping side, somebody who will deal with all the buyer leads for me. And I pretty much, once I get a deal, it's just literally waiting to collect a check. And that's all. It's really awesome. But the drawback is if something happens to my agent, like one of my better agents just went through eye surgery right now, and he's kind of limping along and not as productive as he once was. And so that creates a bottleneck that I have to figure out, right? Like, and there's weird relational things you have to navigate because like I don't want to make him mad by giving other agents my properties, right? Like, or if, God forbid somebody died or something like that happened, you have to go through all that and you have less control, right? Like, you might feel like you could get more, a higher price, or you care more about the property. So you're going to make it more of a priority because it's your property that you're selling at the end of the day. So if you want more control, or if you're doing seller financing, that's another side that's harder to do with agents. Not impossible, but harder to do. You got to figure out how you're going to pay their commission if you do seller financing. Branding and having a email list and all that stuff is probably the route that you want to go. But still, incorporating land specific agents in your ecosystem, if you are branded and you're doing your own listings, is still a really good strategy. Because what we used to do at Simple Wholesaling, one of my responsibilities as the disposition manager was to blast out a specific email blast to agents that we had a relationship with that had investor buyers or had seller financing buyers and that kind of thing. So if you can gather a list of land specialized agents for a particular market that you do a lot of business in, blasting out to a niche list like that can be really helpful. And just say, hey, I'm kind of selling this for sale by owner, but I'm willing to pay an agent commission if you bring me a buyer. That kind of structure, and then you should be off to the races, and could probably benefit from doing a little bit of both of agents and not agents. Or if you're in my situation similar to me where you're short on time, working with one can be pretty great, but you just have to weigh the pros and cons.
We've sort of talked about these other two things here: closing and communication and due diligence. Just going to the last thing here. So, and this is the last thing on this list by design, and that is, maybe you should lower your price. And I think lowering your price, I'm totally guilty of this. It's kind of like the easy button in some ways. Like, it's not selling, just cut the price. Maybe that'll help, when there's probably a lot of other things you ought to explore first before doing that. Because remember, like, we're making offers that should allow us to price it really low to begin with. So, like, that theoretically, that shouldn't be the problem if you've already done proper research on the front end. There's probably something else that needs to be dialed in better before you go here. Like all the stuff we just talked about, better listing, posting in more places, all this stuff. However, that's not to say there's never a time to lower the price. Sometimes that really is the problem. I just wouldn't have a knee-jerk response to do that as your first reaction. And also the seller financing component. If you're able to do that, that can really make the price almost irrelevant in some ways because they don't have to pay the full price right away. So, yeah, so that's just, we've also got a blog post covering a lot of the stuff, by the way. I'm gonna link to that in the show notes as well. It's basically just 10 ideas you can pursue if you've got a property that's not selling. So, um, so anything else you want to add on that segment, Jaron?
Yeah, the last thing that I would just throw out there is I don't mess with price at all, at least for 6 months. Like, and I might not even touch it for another, like 3 months. I do try to sell my properties within a year of ownership. So if I gets closer to the year mark, like maybe within a quarter of the year, I'll try to, maybe do a fire sale or drop the price or whatever. But for at least 6 months, if something is not selling, I'm not changing anything about the price, because it just sometimes you can do everything right, and sometimes it just takes longer to sell.
Kind of what you just said there, Jaron. So this issue of like it just taking a while for stuff to sell and your money is kind of tied up and you're just playing the waiting game, which is super frustrating when like you need that money to move so you can buy another property. So this kind of ties into the next big issue of like, what if you're not profitable? What if you're spending all this time and money and effort on something and like the profit just isn't there, or it's not there at the level that you want it to be? Like it's not meeting your expectations in terms of, when and why you got into this business. Jared, what's your story about profit first? You want to go through that?
Yeah, so I mentioned profit first a little bit in the beginning of today's show, but I really think that every person who graduates high school should read Profit First because it just gives practical knowledge of how to manage finances for those that aren't accountants. Accounting is a little bit weird. It's not that intuitive. Like because they account for money that has already been spent a lot of the times, whereas Profit First accounts for money that is going to be spent, and has you prepare for the needed operating costs and taxes and things that are going to be coming to get you, to bite you. So I've really benefited a lot from Profit First, because it's again that second side to that success coin. Is it's not just knowing how to generate revenue by doing a certain activity. It's knowing what to do with that revenue that really moves the needle forward. Like all got into business to make money. I mean, at the end of the day, it might be freedom, it might be other things, but all of that stems from us making more money. And you'd be really surprised how many entrepreneurs and small businesses are not profitable. Like they might at the RIA group be like, yeah, I'm doing 30 deals a month, or I'm doing this and that, but behind closed doors, they're losing money and they're about to go bankrupt and they're stressed to the max and it's terrible. That's not what business is supposed to be. And Profit First it gives you a system where if you work it according to that system, or at least use some of those principles and tailor it to your life and your personality and all of that, I think it can be extremely helpful. Really, the premise is you should take profit first and then run your business on what's left after that. So if you have, profit is priority number one for your business, that's the money that you get paid as the business owner. Then there's an owner's salary, which is what you get paid for being your number one employee in your business. And that's what you pay yourself once you've scaled and you can sustain your life on that. That's what you pay yourself on a monthly basis. And then there's the tax account. And according to the Profit First system, your business covers not only the taxes for your business, but your personal taxes as well. And then from there, you can set up different accounts, like literal bank accounts is how they divide it up. They modernized the envelope system. It's essentially like an envelopes or a holding place for different functions in your life and business. After that, you would do operating costs and direct mail and all of that. And I tell a lot of our coaching students, hey, when you're first getting started, there's no rush or no pressure, no shame in running your business campaign to campaign. So I'm going to do a direct mail campaign, work the leads, get the properties, get them to where from this campaign there, the majority of them are sold and I'm sitting on a lot of cash in the bank. And then at that point say, okay, how much am I going to allocate for the next campaign? And having the rhythm of your business be from direct mail campaign to direct mail campaign instead of like, I'm going to send out 4,000 units of mail every single month without fail. Because especially when you don't know what you're doing, that's a recipe, I think, for disaster, or can be. I mean, you might luck out and that's great if you do, but more often than not, I mean, that's what really hurt me in the beginning of my land business is I just committed to too much too quickly because I came out of simple wholesaling, which was a huge operation, spending tens of thousands of dollars a month in direct mail. I was like, I'm going to be my own version of simple wholesaling. And I got too big for my britches, as they say.
What Jaron just said there was a little bit of a recap of what we talked about with David Richter in the previous episode 101. So if you're interested in Profit First, obviously read the book, but David Richter, he actually deals with Profit First specifically for real estate investors. There were a lot of good insights in that as well. So that's retipster.com/101. So check that out. But I know another issue with getting past the lack of liquidity is, I mean, you could consider money partners. And this has been something that has just become more and more prevalent. It's actually kind of cool to see because there's lots of people out there who don't have the money, but they are willing to do the work. And there's lots of people who do have the money and they don't want to do the work. And it's just a matter of finding somebody who can do that with you. And believe me, like everybody's out there looking for each other. So I think I think the wrong way to go about looking for people like this is to just post an open-ended announcement like, hey, I'm looking for money partners. Don't do that. That's really annoying. That's kind of borderline spam. What I would do is pay attention to the forums or the Facebook groups or wherever you're at. Pay attention to who's talking about their deals, who is clearly chiming in with a lot of knowledge and smart responses, kind of just displaying their competence. And like reach out to them directly, like send them a private message or send them an email and start the conversation that way. It's a lot more personal. It's a lot harder for them to ignore you when they see that kind of thing. I mean, they can, but when there's a direct connection like that, it just is a lot more effective. And this takes more work to do it this way, but it's more effective too. So whatever situation you're in, whether you have more money or a lack of money, but you do have time, keep your radar out and look for people and strike up these conversations and network because it can really solve a huge problem.
Yeah, and if you can, I think it would be a good idea to try to get a handful of deals under your belt before you really start reaching out to money partners, because you kind of
Definitely.
want to smooth out your mistakes, or overcome your learning curve first, because the pressure's on, man. I mean, that is one thing for sure. I'm right now, I guess, yeah, I'm exclusively using private money partners in all of the deals that I do. And it was like, I think 2 years or 3 years before I even thought about bringing on a private money partner. When you're using somebody else's money to buy a property, if you're wrong or you lose money, like that's your reputation on the line, and that can go by very quickly. So you got to be very confident and competent in knowing what you're doing. An alternative to that, though, there are some land guys for very expensive ROI. They will take a lot of your profit, but they will finance deals for beginners and walk you through due diligence and be involved in the process. So those do exist out there, and I do think that that could be a good option for those that are lacking financial resources. But you have to be willing to give up a big chunk of the profit.
Another option, and I'm always a little hesitant to just like recommend this far and wide because it's not right for everybody. Not everybody's in a situation where they can manage money correctly and wisely, but there are options out there like Fund and Grow that can help you get access to interest-free business lines of credit. Again, I say that very cautiously because it's basically what's happening is you're able to get business credit cards, which do not show up on your personal credit report because it's a business line of credit. You can take the money and convert it to cash and buy real estate with it through a intermediary called Plastic. But the big catch is, this 0% interest period is going to end after 12 months or 15 months. Like it doesn't go on forever. So like you better have a plan for paying that money back in full before that happens. Because if you don't, you're going to be paying a heck of a lot more in interest, like you're paying off a credit card. So if you do that, just be keenly aware of that so you can pay it back either by getting another business credit card to pay that one back, but preferably just selling the property and using the profits to pay it back that way. And that way you can, keep all the profit yourself. We do have an affiliate relationship with Fund and Grow. If you guys ever want to check that out, you can get a pretty good discount on the fee that they charge to settle this up for you. It's retipster.com/fund and grow.
And in that blog post, I document my personal experience using them, because
Yeah,
when
for sure.
when I first heard about them, I was like, that sounds too good to be true. So I'm gonna go test it out. And so I
Yeah.
did, and it was legit. So I think I got a total of like $38,000 in the unsecured lines of credit, and it is a little bit cumbersome to go through Plastic and buy property with it and stuff. At least when I was using Plastic and all that, it was they needed like a big paper trail. So, and at the time I wasn't doing a lot of title company stuff, so I was trying to close myself, and like got down to the wire of needing to send the funds, and then would like run into hiccups or bottlenecks sometimes. So just be aware that like each time you use Plastic, like you're going to have a paper trail, and they might give you pushback and underwriting. They just want to verify that you're not paying yourself or paying your sister or your wife or something, because that's illegal, I guess, to liquidate credit cards for personal reasons. But using it to pay vendors or using it to pay for, other thing like even 1099 contractors and stuff. You can do all that through their system. They just need proof of a paper trail.
Yeah, I'm gonna link to Jaron's blog post review that he put together. It's a super good overview of it. Again, in the show notes, retipster.com/102. And but even beyond that, another option is to consider, assigning contracts or doing double closings as a traditional house wholesaler would. We've had a number of different podcast interviews in the past. Again, I'll link to them in the show notes with Renee, with Carl, with Luis, most recently in episode 98, where, it's not necessarily like the cleanest, easiest rubber stamp way to do this, but like if you got no money or, not enough money to keep moving, it's a viable alternative. And there's definitely potential to waste time and pursue deals that fall apart and all this stuff and communication issues. But if you're geared up for that, if you know how to communicate it, and if you know how to follow up with people and connect the right people, it's a pretty cool way to, make money from land deals without actually having to buy them with your own money.
So one of the other things that I wanted to mention, guys, is something that I run into a lot is people might send out like 200 mailers or 500 mailers, and then they say, "Oh, I sent out these mailers and I got no responses. It doesn't work." And 200 to 500 mailers probably isn't enough in terms of a sample size of mailers in order to get good enough feedback. But there's a lot of variable and a lot of caveats to that. Like if you do 200 to 500 of a delinquent tax list or a specialized niche list, or like, like the recently deceased or something, like, yeah, you could have a niche list that highly increases your response rate because there's a higher level of motivation or a higher potential motivation based on that list. So take it with a grain of salt. But if you're going the direction of kind of pulling a list from a data service provider, I typically like to at least be around like 1,500 to 2,000 if I'm testing out a market. That is more aggressive and that is more expensive. I've heard other people say, they might divide that over a couple different counties in a particular state, to kind of see what they got, what's going to end up giving them a good response rate. There's so much that goes into this question of how many mailers do you need to send out? Because, for example, I scrub my list super hard, probably harder than most people that I talk to. Most people, they do basic stuff, might do like anything under a certain assessed value, anything over assessed value, removing the link duplicates or, business named, business owned properties, et cetera, right? And they might do some other things to try and see, if they know there's wetlands in a certain area, they might do that. They don't go line by line. So if you have a lot more properties in there that are higher, they're tougher properties, or more difficult properties, so there's going to be a higher response rate, but you might end up having a lower deal rate because you end up not buying those because they're difficult properties, right? So it can go down to the color of the letter that you sent out, or the messaging in your letter, or if you use a postcard or a neutral letter or a blind offer, or if you're having people you're pushing people to a website, or if you're answering calls live or through Pat Live, or like there's so many different things that can influence your results on this, that anybody with integrity and honesty can't just flippantly say, yeah, I get one deal per every X amount of letters. It doesn't really work that way. But what you can do is you can track over time to see what your average deal rate and response rate is for your specific business in your market based on your messaging and your direct mail pieces and all of that. And I really encourage people to do that. The longer you do that, the more and more accurate it's going to be. But if you had a solid 3 to 6 months of tracking that data, or maybe, do it like 3 to 6 campaigns if you're not mailing every single month, I think that is going to drastically help you understand how to manage your business. Because like, I know for me in my business, I'm getting one deal per around every 2,000. It's really about 1,500, but as a general rule, I know, okay, if I send out about 2,000 letters per property, I know how much I need to spend in order to scale and all of that. So it's really helpful information to get there, but you're going to have to do that tailor custom to your own business and what you're doing in your business.
Yeah.
Well, Jan, I know we've covered a lot of potential, alternatives or different paths people could try. We actually haven't even covered everything, but we've covered most of the stuff we were going to talk about. But as we wrap this up, I just want to ask kind of a brutally honest question, and we can both chime in on this. So, is there ever a situation where a person should give up or put things on pause for the time being? So, maybe not like walking away for good, but you're just like, I got to step away. This isn't working. I got to stop. Like, what other avenues should they exhaust before they make that call? Before they say, nope, I'm done. Because like failure is a possibility. Like it's possible that this just isn't the thing for you, or maybe I don't know. But as we've kind of talked to, there's lots of things that can be done wrong. So I don't know. I know as I think about that, in terms of like reasons to literally quit and say I'm done with this, would be if it's destroying your personal life, if you can't figure out a way to make your business activity work within the confines of your personal commitments and that kind of thing, and have the two play nice, like you might want to prioritize your relationships over your work. Or, if those relationships truly aren't important for some reason, then tell something to stop. But like if they both need to work in harmony and they're not, that could be one potential reason to walk away from this. And another thing I know is like, I've got a good friend who he actually was doing land for over a year and he was succeeding at it to a point, and he decided to walk away from it. And his main reason was like he just didn't enjoy the work. Like it just wasn't that fun for him. He realized, like, I believe in the business model. I know it works. It's awesome. But like at the end of the day, I just don't like spending my time this way. There's other stuff I want to do with my life, and this isn't it. And I think that's an okay reason. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think if anything, it's good to know yourself and good to know your limits and what you do and don't want to spend your life doing. So, do you have any thoughts? As we're talking about this.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the biggest one is if you've stuck to this thing for around 2 years and you don't have much to show for it, it might not be your thing. And I think that that's okay. And I think that we need to give ourselves permission. You actually taught me about, I think it was either sinking cost or you had some phrase for it, but you
Sunk
can't,
cost?
sunk cost. Yeah. Where just because you spend a lot of time, putting a lot of time and resources into it, that doesn't mean that you should necessarily stick it out. It might not be the most beneficial route for you to go. I would not, like I said earlier, I'd be a terrible contractor. So I'm not, I mean, if I were to be a contractor and gave it my best for 2 years, I'd suck at it. And, it's not the right fit for everybody. So I would reiterate that point. And then also what you said about your relationships. I don't think that if your spouse or your loved ones that are really your inner circle are against you doing this, it's not worth it. There's other ways to make money. Don't, um, there might be other issues if they're not, supportive, or if you're dealing with somebody who's always an obstacle to overcome in terms of any way to better yourself and make money. But if for whatever reason they're against real estate, or they have, something against the land business itself, your number one should be your family. Like my wife, she she's been a huge support in my business, and if I had to fight her tooth and nail, this would not work.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And lastly, like I'm sort of, I don't know, take this with a grain of salt, but it is possible that there may come another opportunity in your life, like another business or something that you legitimately enjoy more than this, and or maybe you can make more at that, or in some way it's more conducive to your life. And I think those things are honestly few and far between. And I can say this because I've looked at so many things, and the land business just has it has so many advantages
it
over
does,
everything else in a lot of ways, but it's still not perfect. It doesn't have everything. So,
and it can get
and part
boring.
Yeah, and also part of the reason why I hesitate to say this is because like this is basically shiny object syndrome. And like I've had this as well, where I was like, I kind of want to try this thing for a while. And I just realized like, no, it's just not as good. And I talked to a lot of people who step away from land and end up coming back to it because they realize the same thing. Um, so I would caution you on that, but at the same time, you have to acknowledge like there could be something else for you. And if that is really making itself obvious, then it's not like you need to stick to this just for the sake of, you know, finishing the race. I mean, maybe there is a reason to change course and do something else and, be open to that as a possibility.
Yep, 100%.
I think that kind of wraps it up.
I wish that this podcast existed when I first started my land business, man. We just like, if people take what we shared with them, I think we just like saved people so much money and made
Yeah.
them so much money, It's like
Yeah.
really, this is really good stuff.
I know there's a lot of other land investors out there who would be well equipped to answer a lot of these same questions, but I feel like we are uniquely equipped to address some of these things because like this is like what we talk about every month in our office hours calls for the land investing masterclass. It's just constant barrage of the same questions again and again. And usually there's like different twists on it, like different things, but it kind of boils down to the same stuff, which is a lot of what we just covered. So, and I'll also acknowledge like I still mess some of this stuff up. It's
Me
not like
too.
I have this figured out. Like
Yeah.
I do intuitively know the answer, but that doesn't mean like I'm able to sell properties in a day. Like I get frustrated all the time. So, having this insight and experience doesn't suddenly make it easy for a person. It's more just awareness of how you do navigate through these things and kind of give yourself a break too, realizing like it's not the end of the world. I'm not dumb. Everybody struggles with this. Thanks everybody for listening or watching. Be sure to check out the show notes, retipster.com/102. And if you're listening to this on your phone, text the word free to the number 33777. Hope you guys enjoy this conversation. It's kind of a unique thing that we haven't done a whole lot of, just me and Jaron talking about these kind of things, but hopefully somebody out there got something out of it. So thanks again for listening, and we'll talk to you guys next time.